Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shri Vasadi Go Bhakta Vrinda. Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare, Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare. Jai, Hare Krishna. So, sorry, I don't know what exactly happened as we were starting out there, but something went wrong. I had some issue. So today, as I understand it, our verse is Canto 2, Chapter 1, Text 14. So this is the verse that we are discussing, and here it is on the Veda base. I'll read it. Tvapyetarhi kauravya saptaham jittavadihi upakalpaya tat sarvang tavadyat samparayikam tvapyetarhi tvapyetarhi kauravya saptaham jitavadibi upakalpaya tat sarvam tavadyat samparahikam. And the translation reads, Tava, your, api, also, etarhi, therefore, kauravya, O one born in the family of Kuru. Saptaham, 7 days. Jivita, duration of life. Avadibihi, up to the limit of. Upakalpaya, get them performed. Tat, those. Sarvam, all. Tavat, so long. Yat, which are. Samparayikam, rituals for the next life. So we have here and today I'm not catching a break at all. Everything is going amiss here. Maharaj Parikshit, now your duration of life is limited to 7 more days. So during this time you can perform all those rituals which are needed for the best purpose of your next life. Maharaj Parikshit, now your duration of life is limited to 7 more days. So during this time you can perform all those rituals which are needed for the best purpose of your next life. And we have a short purport here. Shukadeva Goswami, after citing the example of Maharaj Katvanga, who prepared himself for the next life within a very short time, encouraged Maharaj Parikshit by saying that since he still had 7 days at his disposal, he could easily take advantage of the time to prepare himself for the next life. Indirectly, the Goswami told Maharaj Parikshit that it should be he should take shelter of the sound representation of the Lord for 7 days, still remaining in the duration of his life, and thus get himself liberated. In other words, everyone can best prepare himself for the next life simply by hearing Srimad Bhagavatam as it was recited by Shukadeva Goswami to Maharaj Parikshit. The rituals are not formal, but there are also some favorable conditions which are required to be carried out as instructed hereafter. Tvapyetarhi kauravya saptaham jivitadibhi saptaham jivitadvabdhi upakalpaya tat sarvam tavadyat samparayikam. Maharaj Parikshit, now your duration of life is limited to 7 more days. So during this time, you can perform all those rituals which are needed for the best purpose of your next life. So, hello everybody, and today we are talking about the real purpose of life. This is our section that this verse talks about, our topic rather, that this verse talks about. And I wanted to use the keynote or the focus of this class as being understanding creation means that you are realizing that you are not created. That's why the second canto of Srimad Bhagavatam is focused on the idea of creation. Of course, the first canto is too. First and second cantos both deal with different aspects of creation. And when we understand how creation works and our place in it, then it's easier to be focused, committed, and determined to engage in spiritual life. We are focused, committed, and determined. So if we don't know why we're doing something or the reasons for doing something, the motivations are unclear or fuzzy, there's a good chance that we can be misdirected or swayed from our purpose. And of course, this is especially important in our present world because there is a lot of materialistic propaganda that tries to affirm that there is no God and that all forces that we hear or see are purely materialistic in their origin and nature. And therefore, anyone who thinks about God or thinks about any kind of force, person, or any other substance outside the shell of material view, of the naturalistic viewpoint, any such person must be possessed of some kind of faulty thinking. This is our propaganda. We hear it, we see it every day. So Bhagavatam is trying to counter this propaganda. And one of the things that I wanted to point out here, I'll do it kind of quickly, is that when we discuss our world and our knowledge of it, there is a certain hard, repeatable, and demonstrated knowledge that comes from scientific research. And that I have depicted in this kind of hard, gray egg or shell. You know, it's kind of like that's the symbol of it. But beyond the things that are established by hard science, things start to get fuzzy, and not all science is on the same footing. Some science is more speculative than other science. So certainly you can go into a chemistry lab and perform experiments where we mix 2 moles of hydrogen and 1 mole of oxygen, and we get water. So that can be done over and over again. There's nothing, unusual about that. It's pretty established. We don't doubt it. We understand internal combustion engines. We understand the nature of flow dynamics for aircraft, and we understand all these kind of things. We understand electronics and computer architecture. And these things are pretty established, no doubt, and they function at least most of the time. But we see I just had an experience where our digital friends are deciding that they do not want to cooperate with me. The little gnomes are coming out, or the gremlins, and they're saying, ha, 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 we are not going to cooperate with you today. So, at any rate, we have a certain core of scientific established procedure, a scientific established fact, a scientifically established definition, and that is unassailable. There's nothing wrong with that. But toward the edges of science, all the edges, things get hazy, and I'm going to explain what I mean by this. So there is a well-known, well-established central core that most people accept, and it's not hazy, and it's pretty straightforward. And that's why we have science. And that's where science wins its street cred. That's why people pay attention to science, and that's why we have jumbo jets, computer chips, and coffee makers. So but let's look a little bit more. So what is knowledge? This usually gets categorized as justified true belief. So when something is true and a person has some belief about it, then what's in between is knowledge. So truth is simple. Truth is just where we describe something in words, we paint a picture, or we make some symbols, and those symbols relate to the ostensible outside world that we all experience with our senses. And if those symbols, those words, that semiotic relationship between our human capacity for speech and our human capacity to read the external world with our senses, if those two things line up, then we have something that's called truth. Generally speaking, I mean, there's more to it than that, but I'm being a little bit simple here just for the sake of the time constraints that we're under. Now, if you know something and it's right, but you don't have any other knowledge about it, one could assume that you just are lucky. You know, someone could say, I'm going to walk across that bridge, and I know it won't fall. And so you walk across the bridge and it doesn't fall. That's true. You walked across and it didn't fall. But why did you walk across? What was your justification for walking across? Well, you didn't know. So that doesn't qualify as knowledge. It just qualifies as truth. To do something and understand why, to be able to give some reason, to give some depth of explanation, that is what makes truth into knowledge. And of course, it has to be true. So we have to have some fundamental beliefs that go with truth and give us knowledge. So where truth and beliefs intersect, if we have beliefs about things that are incorrect, that doesn't constitute knowledge. If we have truths, but we have no belief about them, we don't know anything about them, that also doesn't constitute knowledge. But where we have something that's true and something that we have a system of beliefs about, then that's knowledge. Okay, so I'm going to move on to the next item here. Now, our empirical sciences, where people think about things and do scientific experiments, they're all based on metaphysical assumptions. Everybody does philosophy. It's impossible not to. And so people who are religious do science and they have their metaphysical assumptions. People who are agnostic do science and they have their metaphysical assumptions. And people who are atheistic and materialistic, they do science and they have their metaphysical assumptions. Everybody has metaphysical assumptions. We assume things are a certain way at a basic level. And metaphysical assumptions are those things which are outside the range of science, at least as we understand it now. They're not physical, otherwise they would be within the hand grip of science, but they're outside. So we call them metaphysical, those kind of things like, is there a God or not? Is the universe eternal? Is it infinite? All those are questions that science is in no position to answer. Well, certainly they speculate about it, but they're in no position to answer it. And of course, religions and spiritual traditions have answers for these, but there's no way to prove them. And Krishna makes it so we can't prove these things in any kind of hard way, because the material world is designed to be fuzzy, 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 fuzzy. Oh, it's so nice and fuzzy. So this is how our world is limited. When we examine things through empirical science or even just our own everyday human examination, we find that the world we experience, also like science, has a hard, sort of solid shell. We know what we're seeing, we know what we're hearing, we can touch things, smell things, etc. And these are pretty solid and tangible, and we usually don't have much problem with them. But if we go a little ways away from those things that are right here, those things that are right now, those things that we can touch, taste, feel, smell, and see, from things we can control, we easily and quickly run into the twilight zone, that hazy world outside of what we experience. When things get very complex, we get into the twilight zone. When things get very distant from us in location, we get into the twilight zone. When we're talking about the ancient past, things are in the twilight zone. When we're talking about the very large, things are in the twilight zone. When we get and we talk about things we can't repeat, they only happen one time, we're in the twilight zone. When we talk about things we can't control, we can only speculate about them. When we talk about the distant future, we're in the twilight zone. When we talk about the very small, we're in the twilight zone. And so the realization that I've had about this is that each one of these arrows is actually pointing at Krishna in some way. When we talk about the very complex, Krishna is the most complex. When we talk about what's most far away from us, it's Krishna. He is very near and very far, as the Vedas tell us. Who's at the very ancient past, at the beginning of creation? It's Krishna. Who's the very largest thing? It's Krishna. He's Mahavishnu, and he's even greater than Mahavishnu. Krishna is unrepeatable. Krishna we can't control. The distant future is also going to be wrapped up, at least in the material world, into Mahavishnu. And the very small in the atom is also Krishna. So each one of these directions, once we get away from the comfortable, the here and now, the controllable, the easily perceived by the senses, once we move away from that point, we move outward towards the twilight zone. And the reason it's the twilight zone is Krishna claims that he is not going to expose himself to the demoniac and atheist. He withholds knowledge of himself, and that's how Maya works. Maya works by hiding Krishna. It's not an accident, it's a design feature of the material world. So ultimately, every one of these things goes towards Krishna. And that's why scientists have such a hard time, because they want to go deeper into all these arrows, but at the same time they want to avoid Krishna. So they are given a cloudy understanding that gives them some sense that there is something outside of Krishna. But ultimately, it can't be established very rigorously. It falls apart. So that's the point that I wanted to make here, that when people claim that science is a done deal, when people claim that our world is full of already established facts, they're ignoring the fuzzy direction at the end of those facts, which we go to when we are discussing things very small, when we start discussing things very complex, when we start discussing things in the ancient past, when we start discussing things in the distant future, when we just start discussing things that are very big, all these things, especially things we can't control, all these things are in that direction where we knew something, but now we're getting farther and farther away from what we know and closer into the twilight zone, where you either have to accept Krishna or reject him. And the materialistic sciences reject him, and spiritualists and spiritually oriented scientists, they do accept him. But there's a lot of hard propaganda being made by people who reject the Supreme, but claim that there is something that they can explain that has nothing to do with Krishna. So today we're seeing that a person like Maharaj Khatvanga was a person who could understand that his life was coming very soon to a termination. The story goes, I don't know if you all discussed it yesterday or not because it was brought up in yesterday's verse, but Maharaj Khatvanga was a very powerful king. He was very pious and very competent. And the demigods invited him to help them in their fight against the demoniac soldiers when that was an issue. So Maharaj Khatvanga went there and he fought. And then they offered him a benediction for his help in fighting against the demoniac powers. And so Maharaj Khatvanga didn't want any material benediction. He simply asked that he could know when his life would be finished. And since the demigods had that knowledge within their grasp, they told him. And they said, your life will be finished in a moment. So Maharaj Khatvanga immediately left the heavenly planets and came to the earth plane. So a moment in the heavenly planets is a longer time on the earth plane. So he kind of postponed his demise a little bit, but he immediately prepared for it. He understood that what needed to be done was he had to put aside all the issues of the material world and immediately focus his mind on understanding the Supreme and developing a relationship and service to the Supreme, which he did. And this is nicely described in the 9th chapter of the 9th canto of Srimad Bhagavatam. So we hear more about Maharaj Khatvanga. And he says in 9.947 that this world is like a Gandharvapura, or a mythical city in the sky. That in the material world we have many things that we can see, but nobody is actually interested in a Gandharvapura, something that is not in fact real. A Gandharvapura is like the Vedic, version of horse eggs, or a flower in the sky. These are various metaphors that describe the idea that we have things which people talk about, but they're not substantial. They're simply creations of the mind. So this is the verse actually itself. I'll read it here very quickly. Therefore, this is 9.9.47, the dynasty of Amsuman, which is describing the words of Khatvanga when he learned that he would be very soon leaving his body. Therefore, I should now give up my attachment for things created by the external energy of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. I should engage in thought of the Lord and should render service unto him. This material creation, having been created by the external energy of the Lord, is like an imaginary town visualized on a hill or in a forest. Every conditioned soul has a natural attraction and attachment for material things, but one must simply give up this attachment and surrender into the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So, in this verse, we have this Gandharvapura, you see it here. Atesha maya rachiteshu sangam gunesha Gandharvapuro pameshu rudam prakrityatmani vishvakartur bhavena hitva tamaham prapadye. So Gandharvapura is the word here. And Gandharvapura means a town or house seen in the forest or on a hill. An imaginary vision of something that appears real, but actually it's either an illusion or an imagination of the mind. Either it's something physical that actually is traced back to an illusion or a system in the material world that creates an illusion, or it's someone's complete imagination from their own mind. So this was the Gandharva Pura of Maharaj Khatvanga, and he felt that this whole material world is a Gandharva Pura, and in fact it is. Sometimes we do describe the material world as a virtual reality, because nothing in this world will last, and therefore to place ultimate and important emphasis on the things of this material world is ultimately a complete waste of one's life. And that's why we constantly hear in Srimad Bhagavatam that the material world is certainly substantial, and we have to act in it in a way that is either pious or devotional. And if we act in either a pious or devotional way, we will not become entangled in it. But we need to go beyond the pious to the devotional, where we will act in such a way that we will gradually become totally uninterested in the things of this material world, and thus leave our material world behind. All right, so I traveled kind of fast through all that, but let me ask if any of you have any questions about any of that, as we are at this point. We've got about 13 minutes or something like that left before the clock runs out.
Hare Krishna Maharaj.
Jayanu.
In preparation for leaving the material world, when you first started, you said that recitation of the Srimad Bhagavatam, or listening to the recitation of the Srimad Bhagavatam and chanting, is how one should prepare for leaving this material body and leaving the material world. Does it matter who recites the Srimad Bhagavatam or who is available for chanting at that time?
Yes, it does. The pastimes of the Lord and the philosophy of the spiritual process, the philosophy behind the spiritual process, must be explained by someone who is well versed in them. Of course, everything has some purifying or redeeming effect. But if we hear from someone who's not actually an authority, we may become bewildered. They may explain something in a way that harms our understanding or our faith rather than increases it. So that's why we have to be somewhat careful there. Bhagavad Gita, Bhagavatam, should be heard in the association of devotees, and we should hear from advanced devotees who are qualified to be able to give proper explanation. The whole story about Parikshit coming to the banks of the Ganga and waiting to die, and he became surrounded by very many different proponents or speakers of Vedic literature and Vedic knowledge, and he became confused by them. And until Sukadeva Goswami came, then they all relinquished their personal explanatory spotlight and gave it to Maharaj Parikshit. Gave it to Sukadeva Goswami. And as a result, Sukadeva Goswami spoke in a way that cleared Maharaj Parikshit's doubts, and he was completely fixed and ready when it came time to leave his body in 7 days. So Maharaj Khatvanga only had a short time left to live, and so did Parikshit. We don't know how long Maharaj Khatvanga actually had, but Parikshit had 7 days, so that's not much time. But in 7 days, one can certainly become purified. And Maharaj Khatvanga might have become purified in a shorter length of time. Actually, almost instantaneously, we can become detached from the material world. But of course, if we've lived an entire life of material focus and of being entangled and entrapped in material thinking, the possibility at the end of our lives will suddenly change that whole drift of our entire consciousness and become totally enwrapped in thinking about the supreme. That's very unlikely. It's very unlikely. So that's why we practice engaging in devotional life during this lifetime in our current body. And therefore, that when we leave this body, there's a good chance that as we have been struggling to remember Krishna throughout our lives, at the last point, we will remember Krishna in a likely way. Ante Narayana Smriti. So the Bhagavatam says that at the end one should remember Krishna.
Maharaj, can you repeat the last bit? You got cut off.
What's that? Okay. So I said that, so at the last time, at the last part of life, one should therefore remember Krishna. There's a verse, I believe it's in Bhagavatam, Ante Narayana Smriti, that at the end one should Narayana, remember Narayan or Krishna. So this is, in one sense, the purpose of all of our devotional actions. So at the end of life, we will naturally and easily remember Krishna. The Pandavas easily remembered Krishna, which is what we're studying on Sundays in the 15th chapter of first canto. And here we are in the first chapter of second canto. And we're seeing that Katvanga and Parikshit also are facing that same point in the normal course of a lifetime, that point where that lifetime terminates. And both of them were able to remember Krishna. Other questions, anybody else there?
Hare Krishna Maharaj.
Yes, Cynthia.
Maharaj Katvanga knew he would pass, so he had time to prepare. Say, for example, we never know when we're going to pass.
Right.
But we are involved in spiritual life. Say someone passes, but they don't take to a bona fide spiritual master. Do they just take birth in another Brahmin family? Or how does that work? Where do they go from?
Yeah. Everybody, there's, I believe, in Bhagavad Gita that in this endeavor there's no loss or diminution, and even even a little bit of progress on this path saves one from the greatest type of fear. So that verse describes that even a little bit of effort to overcome the material world will give one some kind of benefit. And we hear that in the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna says, even in the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna says, even if one, Arjuna asks the question, what happens to someone who fails in the process of spiritual life, the yoga brashta. The yoga brashta is someone who makes a effort to engage in spiritual life, but somehow fails, doesn't actually make the grade. So such a person, what happens to them? Do they lose everything because they didn't manage to make it in the spiritual world, and they didn't manage to make anything in the material world either because they gave up so many material things? Therefore, so don't they lose out on both counts? And the answer is no. They don't lose out on both accounts. They, as Krishna says, a person who after a short time falls from spiritual life such a person becomes born in a family of wealthy aristocrats, and a person who actually is long-term in spiritual life and fails, such a person is actually born in a family of devotees. So such a person is actually neither loses in either way. So this is the nature of the way the spiritual world works, that if we try to do something for spiritual life, we will never lose. We will pick up where we left off. We will always pick up where we left off. So the verse I was thinking is Nehabrikama nasosti pratyavayo navidyate swalpamapyasya dharmasya trayate mahatobhayat. In this endeavor there is no loss or diminution, and a little advancement on this path can protect one from the most dangerous type of fear. So that's Bhagavad Gita 240. Nehabrikrama nasosti pratyavayo navidyate swalpamapyasya dharmasya trayate mahatobhayat. In this endeavor, there is no loss or diminution, and a little advancement on this path can protect one from the most dangerous type of fear, which is, of course, falling into the animal species. This is described later. And we also have this verse. And this is in in Bhagavad Gita, I believe, 641. The unsuccessful yogi, after many, many years of enjoyment on the planets of the pious living entity, is born into a family of righteous people or into a family of rich aristocracy. So this is the pronouncement here by Krishna. This is the idea that Krishna has asked if, or Arjuna has asked rather, if what will happen to the person who makes an effort but doesn't succeed. So this is Krishna's answer, but let's back up one notch here. Almighty arm Krishna, does not such a man... Oh, we have to go back one more. Arjuna said, "O Krishna, what is the destination of the unsuccessful transcendentalist who in the beginning takes the process of self-realization with faith, but who later desists due to worldly mindedness and thus does not attain perfection in mysticism?" So if someone gets the wrong kind of guide or makes it up on their own or can't follow in some way or another, for whatever reason, if one is unsuccessful, what happens to them? This is what Krishna is hearing from Arjuna as a question in 6th chapter of Bhagavad Gita, verse 37. And Krishna, he goes on to say, "Almighty arm Krishna, does not such a man who is bewildered from the path of transcendence fall away from both spiritual and material success, perish like a riven cloud with no position in any sphere?" So, as Prabhupada explains in the purport, if a person does not succeed in spiritual life, then he also didn't succeed in material life, because you have to give up material life to try to succeed in spiritual life. So it seems like you lose at both games. You didn't succeed materially, and you didn't succeed spiritually. So you're like a riven cloud. You don't have anywhere to go, and you don't have any accomplishment behind your back or anything to give you solace for the future. But actually, Krishna will answer this. This is my doubt, O Krishna. I ask you to dispel it. For but you, there is no one who can be found who can destroy this doubt. So Krishna describes, so son of Pritha, transcendentalist, engaged in auspicious activities, does not meet with destruction either in this world or the spiritual world. One who does good, my friend, is never overcome by evil. The unsuccessful yogi, this is the yoga brashta, one who has fallen from the path. The unsuccessful yogi, after many, many years of enjoyment on planets of the pious living entities, is born into a family of righteous people or into a family of rich aristocracy. So this is the unsuccessful yogi. Or, if unsuccessful after long practice of yoga, he takes his birth in a family of transcendentalists who are surely great in wisdom. Certainly such a birth is rare in this world. So one way to look at this is to think that spiritual life might be compared to a staircase where you have stairs, and the stairs could be lettered like we have the letters of the alphabet, step A, B, C, D, E, F, G. So if you make it to step B and you leave your body, then you'll come back and you'll be trying to work to get to step C. You won't be reduced back to step A. If you're at K and you leave your body, then you will be beginning at step L. You won't be reduced to step B or step A or any of those things. You will start at step L. You will take up where you left off. So as it explains here, these are two broad categories that Krishna describes: those who fail after short practice of yoga and those who fail after long practice of yoga. Those who have not gotten very far along, they will be born in a righteous family or a family of rich aristocracy. And those who are fail after long practice, they will be born into a family of transcendentalists. So they will get a great head start on the process of spiritual life, because from the very beginning, their family will help them. And they will immediately learn about spiritual life, as opposed to many of us who were born in families who had absolutely almost no idea what was going on and didn't help us much at all. Any other quick questions before we wrap it up?
I just have a quick thing.
Yeah.
When we say born into a wealthy family, it's a wealthy family that is able to help us in spiritual life, not just a wealthy family like Donald Trump's family or something like that.
You must have been reading the new book. I just had to say that. I don't know. At any rate, the idea, of course, is that it depends also on a lot of other factors. If we have a lot of attachment for material things, we may get born in a wealthy family, and we may actually be distracted, or we may be attacked or countered by our wealthy family as we try to take to spiritual life. That can happen. But the idea of having a wealthy family in the background means that one will not be so much lost in the struggle for material existence that they won't be able to take any time out for spiritual examination or spiritual introspection. In our world, many people are so down that the only thing they can do is just struggle to stay alive. So in such a life, examining the purpose of life is got a low priority. There's almost no time for it. Whereas in a wealthier family, there is time for it, even if the family themselves may be very materialistic. So it could or it could not be. Depends on the circumstances. This is a nice thing about karma and about Krishna. Karma makes sure that we get the right fit for our past bad deeds and good deeds. On the other side of the coin, if we're already taking to Krishna, Krishna knows what the environment should be to help us make quickest progress. If the environment actually would be beneficial for us because we're being constantly at war with our wealthy parents, if that actually increases our devotion, Krishna will arrange for that to happen. On the other side of the coin, if we're already pretty satisfied and solid in devotional service, he might allow them to be not so contrary and to help us as we engage in devotional service rather than detracting from the attempt.
Thank you very much, Maharaj.
All right. So here we are, July 22nd. And we are today ending up with our discussion on the understanding our place in the world, which helps us to come to terms with why we should struggle for spiritual life. We understand how creation works, that the material energies are, they start out very mysterious and very ethereal. And gradually they become more solid and tangible, more palpable. And as they do, we get more of a material grip on them. But ultimately, everything material is born out from everything spiritual and more ethereal. So if we recognize that those things that are tangible are in one sense the least real, and those things which are very ethereal are in one sense the most real, even though from a sensory point of view, it seems the opposite, then we'll make progress in spiritual life. So I don't want to keep anybody from breakfast. And again, I hope you all have a good Krishna conscious day. And thank you very much for your attention. And all glories to Srila Prabhupada, all glories to the Vaishnava devotees of the Lord. Hari Hari Bo.